We're looking at chapter 12 of our text, and that deals with persuasion. The first segment dealt with the audience, the different types of audiences. The second section now deals with the elements of persuasion. So we will be looking at something you've probably done in a English 111 or 112 course or class. That is ethos and the power of speakers' credibility, pathos and the power of emotion, logos and the power of logical appeals. We'll also look at mythos, that's something newer for some of you, and the power of narratives. And then lastly, we'll look at various argument fallacies. So it might be a longer video, keep that in mind. So let's get going then. The very first one is ethos. When we think of when we define persuasion as attempting to influence others through communication. So persuasion is intended to influence your choice through what Aristotle termed three things, basically. We're appealing to three things. A fourth has been added. The first one is ethos, and that is speaker credibility. Pathos, that is emotion. Third is logos, or logical arguments, critical thinking. And then lastly, what's been added since Aristotle's work is mythos, and that is cultural narratives, an appeal to cultural narratives. So ethos. Ethos refers to a speaker's credibility. What makes the speaker worthy of belief? So why should you believe in or trust the speaker? In many cases, your audience will decide your message's value based on what they perceive about you in terms of your competence. Your listeners will ask themselves, why should I listen to you speak about this topic? What background do you have to speak? What competence do you have to speak? Second, they will consider whether the content now of your speech has solid, firm support. When it becomes clear that the speaker has not researched their topic, of course, now your credibility, which may have been high initially, now begins to diminish significantly. And then finally, audiences will determine whether you can communicate confidence and control of your subject matter, and that is through delivery. So the third part of ethos is the way you actually deliver the presentation at the end of the day. Trustworthiness. So we've looked at ethos in terms of speakers' credibility, in terms of competence, forgive me. Now we look at it in terms of trustworthiness. When someone is trying to persuade us to think or act in a certain way, the first thing we want to find out is what's in it for them. Can we trust them? Research has shown that trustworthy communicators are more influential than an untrustworthy one, regardless of the level of expertise. So you're not going to listen to somebody who's an expert but is going to lie to you, and it's obvious that they are lying to you. Audience perceptions. Again, it's all in the audience's mind, in their perception. Audience's perceptions of trustworthiness are based largely on your perceived respect for them as well, your ethical standards, and your ability to establish some type of common ground between you and them. So that trustworthiness is also influenced by the audience perception of your ethical standards. And of course, telling the truth is paramount for the persuasive speaker. Telling the truth and making sure that you've laid the evidence out clearly. We'll get to that in terms of logical appeal. That's part also of ethics. If your message is biased in any way and you make little attempt to be fair or even to concede the strengths of an opposing point of view, your listeners certainly will question your integrity. So we looked at competence, We looked at trustworthiness, and now we get to dynamism. Your credibility and your ability to persuade are influenced by the audience's perception of you as a dynamic speaker. Dynamic speakers tend to be vibrant, enthusiastic, confident, engaging, attractive, and skilled in public speaking. And so this impression of you as a dynamic speaker will either be reinforced or altered as they listen for an energetic style that communicates from you your commitment to your point of view and for ideas that build on each other in a logical, clear, convincing way. All right. Second element of persuasion, not only is it ethos, it's also pathos. Pathos involves persuading the audience through emotional appeal. Emotional appeals are powerful at times, and certainly they have the power to elicit happiness, joy, fear, pride, patriotism, hate, anger, guilt, despair, hope, hopelessness, bitterness, and a host of other feelings, as you can tell. Emotional appeals are significant, and some people tend to dismiss them, but they are often the most persuasive type of appeal because they provide motivation to do something. You may change the audience's mind, but you may not motivate them to do something different unless you appeal to their emotions. So the ethical, responsible speaker doesn't distort, delete, or exaggerate information for the sole purpose of charging the audience emotionally so that he is able or she is able to manipulate their feelings for self-centered ends. So look at ethos, pathos, we get to logos now. Logos refers to the rational, factual basis that supports the speaker's position. So this is logical, critical thinking, and this increases your ability to assess, analyze, and advocate ideas. All right, and so when you think of logical thinking, you think of the anatomy of an argument. And to construct a sound, reasonable argument, you need three essential parts. You need a claim. What's your claim? That's your point of view. What's what you are arguing or asserting? It's your thesis statement or your central idea. What do you need? You need something to support that. So if I say we should legalize all drugs, that's my claim. That's the point of view. I need to give you evidence or supporting materials. Now, when you test the evidence, the supporting materials against the claim to ensure that they support the claim, that is referred to as reasoning. It's a method or process of reasoning. So the claim, first, is a statement or contention the audience is urged to accept. What is the speaker asserting? What's your point? What's your point of view? The data are evidence in support of an idea you advocate. So what is the speaker's support for the assertion? What is your proof? Why? And here you would appeal to narratives, examples, testimony, statistics, facts, all those supporting material that we spoke about in an earlier chapter. The warrant now is the inference that links the evidence with the claim. Why they use the term warrant? I guess it's a term from argumentation and debate. It's basically a reasoning process. It answers the question, how are the claim and the data connected? And so the links between the two, between the claim and the data, may be deducted by deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, causal reasoning, analogical reasoning. So let's look at some of those. So when you put the three elements together, for example, here's the example that the text uses. You might be at a restaurant and you take a bite from a steak sandwich and say, this is the worst, absolute worst sandwich I've ever tried. With this announcement, you're making a claim, right? That you infer now from tasting the meat. The evidence is the food before you. The warrant is the link between the data, right? And that is the tasting of the food, and the claim, this is the worst. Why? And so it may be because the food is spoiled or old or poorly prepared, and so the taste is bad. We persuade others that a claim or conclusion is highly probable by inductive and deductive reasoning. Only when strong probability is established can you ask your listeners to make the inductive leap. And we'll get to this in terms of what is inductive reasoning, because with inductive reasoning, you're going from specific cases. So for example, if I have a friend Joe that smokes 2 packs a day and he contracts cancer and dies. And I have another friend, Bob, who smokes 3 packs a day, and he contracts lung cancer and dies. And I have another friend, Jim, who smoked 2 packs a day. He contracts lung cancer and dies. I have 3 cases, specific cases, and I might reach a general conclusion. If you smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, you probably will contract lung cancer and die. That's moving from individual to a general conclusion. The other way around is deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning. That moves from statements as premises to a conclusion, and we'll get to that in a second. All right, I'll give you an example of it. So let's start off with inductive reasoning, which I've explained here quickly. That is moving from specific examples, and this is the scientific method. You have a large enough sample size, and you're going to draw a conclusion from that sample size. So you're moving from specific examples to a general conclusion. So you might say, I had an awesome beagle. Now I think beagles are the best dogs. Well, having one dog certainly doesn't give you the authority to pontificate that beagles are the best dog. A sample size of 1 is insufficient. So how do you know when you have enough evidence to substantiate a claim? So you've probably heard on TV that somebody make a claim that 2 out of 3 doctors state that this particular medication is good for you. So you ask, how big was the sample size? How many doctors are there? And if they say 3, well, the sample size is way too small for you to believe it. One problem with the inductive reasoning is that the individual cases don't always add up to a correct conclusion, especially if the sample size is too small or because there's limited information. So very often you must tell the audience that this is probably true or just possibly true. So the 3 most common strategies for inductive reasoning involve analogy, cause, and sign. And let's look at those. So analogies. They establish common links between things that are similar and that are not so similar. So if I wanted to argue that legalizing drugs will work, I might want to use the analogy because Portugal is one country that's legalized all drugs and it seems to be working. The demand has actually decreased for drugs. And so, but that analogy saying that comparing the USA to Portugal, the 2 countries are not exactly the same. That's why it's an analogy, a comparison, right? And I have to prove in some sense that what worked in one country will work in another country. Analogies are effective tools for persuasion when your audience is convinced that the characteristics of one case, that is Portugal, are similar enough to the characteristics of the second case, the USA, that your argument about what's happened in the first, Portugal, decreased demand for drugs, will also happen in the second, in the USA, decreased demand for drugs. All right. When you reason from cause, you infer that an event of one kind contributes to or brings about an event of another kind. So smoking causes lung cancer, right? We have the result, and that is lung cancer. We're trying to reason back as to what caused it, smoking. So the presence of a cat in a room when you are allergic to cats is likely to bring about a series of sneezes until the cat is removed. And so you make the connection that while you're sneezing, nothing else has changed other than the introduction of the cat. So you've eliminated all extraneous variables. The text uses this one, an inaccurate and low census count of the homeless in Detroit is the cause. The effect is fewer federal dollars will be sent to Detroit to aid the homeless. So when used correctly, causal reasoning can be an effective persuasive tool. It's part of the inductive process, or can be, as long as you establish that a cause-effect relationship is there and it can stand up to scrutiny and criticism. So to be valid, your reasoning should exhibit the following characteristics. The cause and effect you describe should be connected. The cause should be acting alone. There shouldn't be any extraneous variables. Mold in the house, for example, that might cause you to sneeze as well. The effect should not be the effect of another cause, and the claim and evidence must be accurate. The argument from sign is slightly different. The inference step is that the presence of an attribute can be taken as the presence of some larger condition or situation of which the attribute is a part. So as you step out early in the morning to begin jogging, the gray clouds and moist air can be interpreted as signs that the weather conditions are likely to result in a rainy day. Or, to use an age-old cliche, where there's smoke, there is fire. The presence of a sign, smoke, might establish the fact that there is a fire somewhere. Deductive reasoning, and we've looked at inductive reasoning, now we get to deductive reasoning, that is drawing conclusions based on the connections between statements that serve as premises. So this is known as syllogistic reasoning, that is a major premise, a minor premise, and then a conclusion. So I might use, let's say, all men, major premise, all men are liars. Now how did I come about that? Anyway. The minor premise is Paul is a man. The conclusion then is Paul is a liar. The thing about it is the major premise. If the major premise is up for debate, then you cannot certainly get to the conclusion. But that's what deductive reasoning is all about. Here's another one that text uses. Citizens may rightfully overthrow a tyrannical government. Major premise. The King of Great Britain's rule in the American colonies is a tyrannical government. Conclusion. The citizens of the American colonies may rightfully overthrow the King of Great Britain's government in the colonies. All right. The last one, it's a longer video, my apologies. Mythos on the power of narratives. And so within the last several decades, scholars have begun to recognize the power of stories, folklore, anecdotes, legends, and myths. George Washington and the cherry tree. And these are all used to persuade. They appeal to the founding fathers. So mythos is the term given when content supports a claim by reminding an audience how the claim is consistent with their cultural identity, who they are as a community, as a people, as a nation. They certainly create common ground with their listeners. So a good example of the text used is that of Japan's emperor addressing his people following their calamity. And he says this, in order to tie the nation together. I have been informed that there are many people abroad discussing how calm the Japanese have remained, helping one another and showing disciplined conduct, even though they are in deep grief. I hope from the bottom of my heart that we can continue getting together and helping and being considerate of one another to overcome this unfortunate time. A cultural identity of coming together is what he appeals to. The next video, we'll look at some argument fallacies. This one has gone on too long.